Before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that we audio and video record our meetings, as well as to the board members to please remember to hit your button on the microphone and to share. They're wireless, so there's only a limited number, so please share with your partners, your neighbors, when needed. And with that, I'm going to sit down and turn it over to our Finance Committee Chairman.
Good morning. We hereby call to order the December 19th meeting of the Finance Committee for the Regional Transportation Authority. Good morning, everybody. I think we'll start with the roll call, please, Madam Secretary.
Okay. Director Colson? Present. Director Groven? Present. Director Holt? Present. Director Cotel? Here. Director Lewis? Here. Director Ross? Here. Director Sager? Here. Director Triani?
Here.
By phone with the necessary paperwork completed. Director Melvin?
Here.
We have a full quorum of 9 present with no absent. If the record would also show that Directors Andalcio, Carey, Frega, Fuentes, Higgins, and Chairman Dillard are all also present.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes from the meeting that was held November 21st. Are there any comments? Are there any questions? Are there any changes? Anything at all? Anyone? Okay, great. Then I'd like a motion to approve in a second, please. Director Groven and Director Lewis, seconds, please. I think
Would you like a baseline roll call?
we would, please. Thank you.
Director Colson? Director Groven? Yes. Director Holt? Yes. Director Cotel?
Aye.
Director Lewis?
Yes.
Director Ross? Yes. Director Sager?
Yes.
Director Triani?
Aye.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
9 ayes.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to item 3A, the report on the monthly financial results from October 2019, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm Eva DeLaurentis. I'm a project manager and analyst in the budget division. Today I'm presenting the year-to-date financial results through October. Ridership and operating revenue remain unfavorable to budget, but expense performance continues to be very good. The regional recovery ratio finished the month 0.8 points favorable to budget at 51.5%. System ridership in October was 4.2% lower than prior year and 1.9% below budget. Year-to-date ridership remains down 3% from 2018. October is historically the highest ridership month as students are back in school and there are no major holidays and generally fair weather. However, there was a snow event on Halloween of this year. CTA also performed a line cut on the O'Hare branch of the Blue Line, which disrupted service. And it is important to note that the CPS teacher strike closed schools for 11 days, which likely also contributed to some of the unfavorable results relative to budget and prior year. In fact, October's 4.2% year-over-year ridership decrease was second only to January's ridership decline. Back on the summary table, each service board continues to record unfavorable ridership results. The shortfall at Pace Suburban Service was 5.7%, highlighted in red. In total, the system is 9 million rides unfavorable to budget. Operating revenue was $16.8 million or 1.7% unfavorable to budget. $13.8 million or more than 80% of the shortfall can be attributed to the lower levels of reduced fare reimbursement from the state. PACE operating revenue is 4.8% unfavorable to budget, highlighted in red, and it's primarily due to lower than budgeted fare revenue caused by ridership shortfalls. The public funding section of the dashboard shows that the results were 2.1% below budget due to unfavorable sales tax, PTF, and RAT receipts. CTA's public funding was $21.1 million or 3.1% unfavorable to budget, highlighted in red, due to underperforming sales tax, PTF, and lagging real estate transfer tax results. Year-to-date operating expenses were $65.9 million, or 2.8% favorable to budget, with all three service boards and ADA paratransit reporting favorable results. Metro results were 3.3% favorable to budget, highlighted in light blue, due to favorability in all expense categories except insurance and claims. Pace's results were 4.5% favorable to budget, also highlighted in light blue, due to favorability in all categories except ADA paratransit overhead. At the regional level, favorable expenses more than offset the unfavorable revenue and public funding, producing a net result which was $21.7 million favorable to budget, an improvement of $2.4 million from last month's result. ADA paratransit recorded a net result favorable by more than 3%, which was driven by strong expense performance. Through October, the regional recovery ratio of 51.5% is favorable to budget by 0.8 percentage points, solidly above the 50% statutory requirement. The fair recovery ratio of 36.4% and the all revenue recovery ratio of 43% were both lower than prior year, as expenses have increased versus 2018, while operating revenues were slightly down. In the right section, the CTA's recovery ratio is 0.2 points above budget. Pace is essentially at budget, and Metro's recovery ratio is 2.6 points above budget due to favorable revenue and favorable expense performance. In summary, the service board's expense performance through October continues to offset the effects of ridership and revenue shortfalls. The regional recovery ratio continues to extend above the 50% level, with 2 months of results remaining. That concludes my remarks. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, the ridership story is a tough story. Any questions, any comments, anyone? Yeah, Director Lewis.
BS seemed to remember.
Oh, I'm standing in front of her.
Oh, sorry. Last year, there was going to be an initiative where we're going to try and connect with other last mile providers to really kind of get at the ridership issue. Has there been anything done concretely relative to trying to, shore up that element, because the ridership continues to decline, and at some point, the cut in expenses is not going to basically be enough to support the recovery ratio.
I don't have any updated information. I don't know if Leanne or Jill do, but I know that they continue to explore that. I know Metro was doing, was in discussions with, I know at their board meeting, they were talking about, continuing to work and explore those partnerships. I don't know that anything definitive has been decided. We can follow up and see if they've done anything further with it. We'll do that, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Yeah, clearly the service boards continue to do a great job at controlling expenses and finding new ways to manage things, but I guess you can only do that for so long, right? So it's a tough story. Okay.
Thank you.
Anything else, anyone? Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 3B, the presentation of the semi-annual project management oversight report, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, good morning. My name is Violet Gunka. I work in the Project Management Oversight Office. Today, I will present the current report on project management oversight. You received the PMO report as part of your board briefing a couple weeks ago, and it includes details for every project. The report was designed to make it straightforward for our board to easily see progress, issues, and risks for the transit capital projects in the region. The PMO program currently includes oversight of all state-funded transit projects, regardless of budget, and all other projects with budgets of $10 million or more, regardless of funding source. Together, this set of projects for the current reporting period represents $5.5 billion. As you know, after nearly a decade without a state of Illinois capital program, transit in the RTA region will get a much-needed infusion from the Rebuild Illinois bill passed by the General Assembly and signed by the governor in June 2019. The state-funded projects presented in this report are part of the prior year's program. As a bit of a background, RTA implements the PMO program pursuant to Section 2.01B of the RTA Act. RTA is required to oversee the service board's capital programs and expenditures. PMO is part of RTA's requirement to fulfill this requirement. Specific involvement includes direct reports and meetings with Service Board project teams, attendance at other project meetings with Service Board project teams, and project site visits and periodic reporting to the Illinois Department of Transportation. RTA PMO staff is augmented by engineering and project management consultants who provide necessary expertise as well as additional staff resources. Can you go back a slide, please? Thank you. At this time, there are 14 projects remaining in the state-funded program. 3 of those projects were completed in this reporting period. So the number of projects in this program will decrease until the money from the new bill starts flowing. Currently, all state-funded projects are on budget. 9 of the 14 projects are on schedule. The 5 projects that are behind schedule are the 95th Street Terminal, Metro Hazel Crest Station, Metro Union Pacific North Line Bridges and Ravenswood Station, Union Pacific West Line Expansion, and Pace Bus Stop Improvement at Joliet Gateway Center, which is currently on hold. Next slide. The change order amounts represent cumulative totals for currently ongoing state-funded projects, and 64% of the region's projects are without change orders. The vast majority of extra costs for change orders has been for added value to the project and for unforeseen conditions. The total cost of change orders represents about 2% of the total budget for the state-funded projects. While all projects are detailed in the report, we have selected one project from each service board to highlight. CTA completed the rehabilitation of Belmont and Jefferson Park stations on the Blue Line. For Belmont Station, this included a new station canopy, site improvements, enlarged bus prepaid boarding area, renovated station electrical and finishes, as well as refurbished platform furniture. For Jefferson Park, improvements included reconstructed bus turnarounds, renovated entrance and customer waiting areas, enhanced lighting, improved signage, new public art, and updated communication elements. Metro completed the reconstruction of the Deering Bridge over the north branch of the Chicago River on the Union Pacific North Line. The project also included the rehabilitation of the Webster Avenue Bridge and the fill of the bridge over the former Milwaukee Road just north of Deering Bridge. Pace executed a change order for additional 6 CNG buses. Currently, there are 102 CNG buses in service. The additional order will bring the total of CNG fleet to 108. The additional vehicles are expected to be delivered in July of 2020. This concludes my presentation. I will be happy to answer any questions.
Are there any comments or questions? Anyone? Yeah, Director Groban.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got kind of the category where we have the most increased spend is called value addition. Can you just give us a feel for what do we mean by value addition?
So if once the project is started and if some of the parts of the station or things are in a condition that they, when they were designing, they expected it will be in better condition, but once they go into the project, it just makes sense to add that additional work to the station when the contractor's already there. So it's value added because there's additional improvements.
Thank you. Any other questions? I kind of have a question. So 64% have no change orders. Is that pretty good? That's a good ratio?
It is pretty good, and I did highlight that the number of projects in the program keeps decreasing. So obviously, if you have 5 projects that have change orders and you're going on a pool of 14, it's going to seem kind of high. But it's not unusual to have change orders on projects, especially construction projects, because like we're talking about the added value or the unforeseen conditions. Sometimes, especially for underground, once you start digging, you don't know what you're going to discover. So sometimes there's change orders for unforeseen conditions, or sometimes it just makes sense to add additional work at the time when we already have a contractor set up. So it's not unusual to see change orders. And 64%, I think it's pretty good.
That's good.
And it's only 2% of the budget of the project. So when you look at it as a whole picture.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah. Any other questions, comments? John? No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next, we'll move on to item 4A, ordinances authorizing the quarterly amendment of the 2019 through 2023 capital program.
Good morning.
Morning.
Chairman Melvin, and members of the Finance Committee and Board. I'm Tatiana Jane, Manager of Capital Programs, and we're here to request your approval of two ordinances. First, an amendment to the 2019-2023 Capital Program, incorporating changes in program revenues and expenses for CTA, Metra, and PACE. And second, a new project scope and funding adjustment of Metra's Innovation, Coordination, and Enhancement, or ICE projects. Let me walk you through the changes we are recommending in the first ordinance. This quarter, we are asking you to approve a total net funding increase to the Regional 5-Year Capital Program of $148.73 million. This increase affects current and future years. The total net increase for CTA is $125.77 million, for Metra $22.95 million, and for PACE $20,000. The $125.77 million increase for CTA consists of $95.86 million in CTA bond issuances to account for existing project commitments, $77.8 million in reprogrammed CTA ground transportation tax GTT bonds and red, purple, and modernization RPM bonds. CTA decreased the amount of issuance of these funds in 2019 because the CMAQ funds became available earlier than anticipated, but increased issuance for 2020 and beyond. CTA increased also the amount of debt repayment for GTT and RPM bonds by $76 million, which reflects the increased proposed amount of bond issuances, and $19.65 million in federal discretionary funding and $8.46 million in other service board funds. For Metra, the $22.95 million increase affects only current year and consists of $17.84 million of new federal State of Good Repair grant for A32 bridge on Milwaukee District North Line, $2.85 million in reprogrammed Metra Fairbox capital funds as the local match to this grant, and $1.52 million in Canadian Pacific Railroad funds, also as a contribution to a match to the same grant. And in addition, $740,000 of ICE funds reprogrammed from completed projects. For PACE, the $20,000 increase affecting current year and consists of federal formula lapsing funds from Round Lake UZA. The details of these funding changes are included in capital program schedules 2A and 2B and attached to the ordinance. Moving to the second ordinance, we are requesting your approval of the new Metra operating ICE project within the Ridership and Fare Enhancement Initiative and the reprogramming of 2016 ICE capital funds to this new project, and scope addition and funding adjustment of electronic crew calling Metra ICE project. RTA staff has reviewed these requests and found them to be justified as outlined in their ordinance request memo. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have regarding any of these ordinance requests.
Great, thank you for your report. Any questions or comments? Anyone? Can we take these two ordinances together? Yeah. We can? Okay, great. So we have two ordinances before us. One for the approval of the quarterly amendment for 2019-2023, and the other for adopting the 2020 Regional Service Board budgets. We can take them together. Any comments, objections? Yes. Yes.
After.
Would you like to?
There were two ordinances with the capital amendments, so those are the two that we're
So
taking
those are the two
together.
we're going to do now? Right, okay, yeah, okay, great. Then we'll do these together. Can I have a motion, please? Director Ross, seconded by Director Cotel. Can we have a roll call, please?
Sure. Director Colson? Yes. Director Groven? Yes. Director Holt? Aye. Director Cotel? Aye. Director Lewis? Yes. Director Ross? Aye. Director Sager? Yes. Director Traiani?
Aye.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
9 ayes.
Thank you very much. And I think that brings us to the end of this. So we're going to adjourn. If there's no further business to come before the public session of the Finance
No,
Committee.
no.
Oh, I'm sorry?
The budget item.
Oh, sorry. We need that. Yes.
We need a vote.
That's item 4B? Yeah, 4B. Okay, so on item 4B, are there any?
Would be.
Okay, so B is going to discuss that. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee and board. As I begin my presentation, I'd like to thank the RTA budget and capital staffs as well as the capital team for their efforts on the 2020 RTA Regional Budget and Capital Program. Each budget season represents its own set of challenges, and the challenges this year were a good problem to have, right? It was focused on the capital program due to the large and welcome increase in state funding. Let's start with a recap of the seven-month process which has led us to today. On May 16th, the RTA Board approved and released the 2020 budget call. The budget call defined the information and requirements that the service boards follow in the development of their budgets. We'd like to thank CTA Metro and PACE for a collaborative effort, which resulted in a funding agreement adopted by the RTA Board on September 12th. The service boards each submitted their budgets and capital programs to the RTA in October, and CTA Metro and PACE boards adopted their 2020 budgets and capital programs at their November board meetings. Now going on to this slide, it shows the schedule for the RTA 2020 budget and capital program, county board presentations, and public hearings as required by the RTA Act. Leanne and I briefed each of the 6 county boards on the 2020 regional budget and capital program. Many of you assisted us in attending those. The proposed 2020 regional budget and capital program has been available for review and comment on the homepage of the RTA website since November 14th. At the RTA Finance Committee meeting on November 21st, the service boards and the RTA presented their 2020 budgets and responded to any questions. Also on November 21st, all the RTA public hearings were held simultaneously here at CMAP headquarters at 2 locations in suburban Cook County and in each of the collar counties as required. Live streaming of the Finance Committee and the board meeting on the RTA website, as we do every month, provided the public with additional opportunities to watch the service board and RTA presentations directly. The public could then state their comments at the meeting, submit them to the RTA staff at the remote hearing locations, or email them from anywhere. Comments could also be made via email at any time since November 14th. 4 people actually presented testimony at the public hearings, including representatives from the Metropolitan Planning Council, the Chicagoland Chamber of Commerce, and the Civic Committee of the Commercial Club. In addition, we received public comments via email that were summarized in our board memo. Finally, at the start of today's board meeting, we will hold a final comment period for members of the public to speak directly to the RTA board. So now looking at the numbers, let's now examine the revenue side of the proposed 2020 regional operating budget. So a state surcharge of 1.5% on RTA sales tax collections is assumed to remain in place, reducing RTA and service board funding by approximately $20 million per year. The budgeted public transportation fund level reflects a known 5% funding cut during state fiscal year 2020, but we're not assuming that that cut will continue to state fiscal year 2021 and beyond. Total revenue for 2020 operations is projected at $3.1 billion. Sales tax receipts of $1.3 billion are the largest revenue component of the 42% of the total. With no fare increases planned in 2020, service board operating revenue is projected to increase by 0.5% from the 2019 estimate to just under $1.2 billion. This is the second largest revenue component at 38%. The state's public transportation fund match on the RTA sales tax and the RET, the real estate transfer tax, amounts to $409 million. Reimbursement from the state for debt service on the Strategic Capital Improvement Program, or SCIP bonds, is expected to hold steady at $130 million. The real estate transfer tax levied in the city of Chicago to fund CTA operations is projected to grow by 3% in 2020 to $68.6 million. Finally, other revenue, including state ADA paratransit funding, federal funding for operations, and RTA agency revenue, represents only 1% of the total revenue for operations. Now looking at 2020 operating expenses, they are projected to grow by 2.2% from the 2019 estimate and by 0.5% from the 2019 budget. Collectively, the Service Board operating budgets comprise about 91% of the RTA operating expenses. CTA's operating budget represents just over half of regional expenses, followed by Metro at 27%, Pace Suburban Service at 8%, and Pace Regional ADA Paratransit Service at 6%. Each of the Service Board's budgets is balanced and meets or exceeds its recovery ratio requirements. RTA debt service of $217.6 million accounts for 7% of the regional expenses. This amount includes both principal and interest on both RTA and skip bonds that fund Service Board capital projects and interest on the RTA short-term debt. The RTA issues short-term debt to manage delays in state funding, primarily public transportation fund delays, which funds Service Board's operations, and the ASA and AFA, which reimburses the RTA for debt service on skip bonds. Remember that state sales tax is never delayed. There is simply a lag in when it gets distributed to us. RTA agency expenses account for 1.4% of the 2020 regional expenses. Finally, the Joint Self-Insurance Fund expenses of $5.9 million, and that is the premium on insurance policies that cover all three service boards, represent less than 0.25% of regional operating expenses. Now a look at recovery ratios. As I mentioned earlier, each of the service boards' 2020 budgeted recovery ratios meet or exceed the required level adopted by the RTA board in September. As a result, the regional recovery ratio for 2020 is budgeted at 50.2%. So it exceeds the 50% statutory requirement. It is important to note that while the regional recovery ratio is budgeted lower than 2019's budgeted ratio of 50.6%, there is less downside risk because for 2020, the service boards have agreed to budget the state reduced fare reimbursement funding level at approximately $17.57 million rather than the $34 million that we've been budgeting at for the last 3 years, even though we've only been receiving half of that. So we won't experience an immediate revenue shortfall that you've seen on the dashboards in the initial period of time in the last few years related to the RFR. So now I'll turn my presentation over to Jill for a review of the capital program, and then we'll be back to answer any questions. Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks, B.
Good morning.
The 5-year capital program is projected to be $8.3 billion, an increase of nearly $4 billion, or nearly twice the amount compared to the 2019 to the 2023 capital program. That's all thanks to the injection of funds from the Rebuild Illinois program, which totals over $3.7 billion. The chart on the left breaks the funding down by service board. The chart on the right illustrates the funding sources. State funds account for 45% of all funding. Federal funds are 41% of the program, and the other funding categories shown here represent 14% of the funding. This represents a more balanced funding approach compared to the past years when there were no state funds. In those years, nearly 80% of the capital plan was made up of federal funds. With the additional funds, the region will be better able to manage the backlog maintenance and rehabilitation of the system. The 2020 capital program is just over $2 billion, again more than double compared to 2019. CTA's 2020 capital program is greatest due to a large bond issuance in 2020. In addition, state funds represent 35% of the 2020 program, federal funds represent 33% of the program, and other local funds, including service board funds and ICE, represent about 1% of the program. Along with the infusion of capital from the Rebuild Illinois program, RTA and the service boards wanted to ensure that a consistent set of principles would be used to determine the priority and the programming of these new funds. 5 principles were agreed upon as they are shown here. Based on the 5th principle here and feedback from civic groups, RTA plans to continue to lead the effort to program new funds based on transparency and performance-based measures. The ordinance that you are considering today contains a provision that the RTA will work towards a regional agreement to program funding, starting for the program year of 2025, in a collaborative and transparent process. The ordinance also includes a timeline for the process to ensure it will be developed and implemented in the next budget cycle. At the RTA Special Finance Committee, you heard from each of the service boards about their individual programs, so I will provide a regional perspective of the projects included in the $8.3 billion five-year capital program. $3 billion will be expended on rolling stock, the largest asset category of the five-year program. Track and structure investments are $954 million. Modernization efforts will be $823 million, mainly comprised of CTA's continuing red-purple modernization and Your New Blue initiatives. And nearly $674 million will be invested in stations and passenger facilities. Debt service on CTA bonds totals $1.1 billion for the five-year capital program. To put the asset categories in a little more perspective, based on the principles previously mentioned, the service boards have allocated the new funds from the Rebuild Illinois program to several important projects across the region. In addition to focusing on state of good repair projects and deferred maintenance, due to the previous lack of state capital funds, some of the major projects each service board plans to complete with Rebuild Illinois funds are listed here. The 2020 to 24 capital programs shows CTA receiving almost $2 billion, Metro receiving nearly $1.5 billion, and PACE receiving $340 million from the Rebuild Illinois program that includes both state bond funds and PAYGO funds. In conclusion, staff recommends board adoption of the proposed operating budget and five-year capital program as outlined in this presentation. The budget proposals and capital programs that are detailed in the ordinance are balanced, based on reasonable assumptions, and meet the statutory regional recovery ratio of 50%. This concludes our presentation, and B and I will be happy to try to address any of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a very good report. Any questions, comments? Dr. Colson.
Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about managing debt. You know, the federal, state, city are wallowing in debt right now, and it's a continuous problem. A few months ago, we raised the ceiling of federal monies that could be used for debt service from 50% to 60%, which might be considered a move in the wrong direction. Just as an example, I noticed the CTA debt service is now consuming about a quarter of the capital money, and there are new bond issuances coming out in the next few years. I think paying down debt is not as sexy as cutting a ribbon on a new project, but it's often more important to the financial integrity of a system. So we have an opportunity, I think, with this new state money coming in, to issuing less service board debt. And I would expect the percentage to go down from 25%, and we need to watch that a little bit and keep it maybe as a goal in the next budget to get that percentage down. That's all.
Thank you, Director Colson. Any other comments, questions, thoughts? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do we have a motion? We need a motion to move and second, please. Director Lewis moves, second by Director Groven. Let's have a roll call, please.
Okay. Director Colson? Yes. Director Groven? Yes. Director Holt? Yes. Director Cotel? Director Lewis? Yes. Director Ross? Aye. Director Sager? Yes. Director Triani?
Aye.
Director Melvin?
Yes.
We have 9 ayes.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your comments, Director Colson. Now to adjournment. If there's no further business to come before the public session of the Finance Committee, I'll entertain a motion and a second to adjourn. Director Groven moves, Director Lewis seconds. Do I have leave? Leave.
Leave.
How about an all in favor?
Thank you.
And a leave?
All in favor? Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. We are hereby adjourned.